On Wednesday's episode of General Hospital, I think the biggest theme is going to be paranoia. Almost every storyline feels like someone trying to hold together a dangerous secret while realizing the situation is spiraling out of control. Michael Corinthos looks especially ruthless right now. I was honestly surprised by how calculated his latest move sounds. Bringing Jacinda Bracken into the loop about his plan to manipulate Willow Kane and Harrison Chase into looking like they're having an affair feels incredibly messy, even by Port Charles standards. To me, Michael seems less interested in justice and more focused on destroying Willow emotionally. The fact that he's apparently relying on surveillance photos from private investigator Elaine makes the whole thing even darker. But unless he gets undeniable evidence, I don't see this scheme ending cleanly for him. Meanwhile, Ethan Lovett and Christina Corinthos Davis could end up providing some lighter emotional material, although there's clearly tension underneath. Ethan inviting Christina to spend time together sounds innocent on the surface, but I think Christina is naturally going to start digging into where he's been and what he's hiding. Ethan's connection to Delilah Wilson already feels like the kind of secret that could explode later. The Willow, Nina Reeves, and Jen Sidwell storyline is probably the most intense part of the episode. Nina's fear seems completely justified at this point. She's trapped in a situation that keeps getting more dangerous every time someone makes another mistake. Willow revealing details about Sidwell's paralytic drug operation without permission may have crossed a line Sidwell can't forgive. What really stands out to me is how hopeless Drew Kane's situation sounds now. Sidwell apparently believes there's absolutely no safe scenario where Drew regains the ability to communicate. That's chilling because it suggests Sidwell may already be thinking in terms of permanent solutions. If Willow hoped she could eventually reverse everything and somehow fix the damage, Wednesday's episode may crush that fantasy completely. I also think Nina is beginning to realize she underestimated Sidwell. At first, she seemed willing to take risks to protect Willow, but now she may finally understand they're dealing with someone who eliminates problems instead of negotiating them away. Her waiting anxiously for news after Willow's private meeting with Sidwell could be one of the episode's most suspenseful moments. Over with Brooklyn Quartermaine and Harrison Chase, their adoption storyline with Phoebe could hit emotional complications fast. Alexis Davis laying down strict rules tells me the adoption process is fragile, and any mistake could threaten everything. Chase continuing to involve Congresswoman Kane may become a serious issue if it creates instability or unwanted scrutiny. Britt Westbourne and Lucas Jones also appear headed into morally gray territory. The phrase, "handle Ross Cullum permanently," definitely sounds ominous. I may be wrong, but this feels like the beginning of one of those classic soap plots where characters convince themselves they're solving a problem, only to make things catastrophically worse. The Curtis Ashford, Jordan Ashford, and Isaiah Gannon material sounds more emotional than explosive, but it could end up being some of the strongest drama of the episode. Jordan removing her bandage and looking at herself in the mirror feels symbolic. I think those scenes will probably focus less on physical recovery and more on identity, vulnerability, and trauma after the accident. Isaiah refusing to cooperate with investigators is understandable from a legal standpoint, but in Port Charles, refusing to cooperate almost always makes someone look guiltier. Portia Robinson's concerns are probably valid. Even if Isaiah is innocent, every decision he's making seems likely to increase suspicion around him. Overall, this episode sounds packed with manipulation, fear, and emotional fallout. To me, the Sidwell storyline especially feels like it's moving toward a point of no return, while Michael's revenge plan may end up creating consequences he can't control. I think the week of May 18th to 22nd on General Hospital looks like one of those classic Port Charles weeks where almost everyone is hiding something and the tension comes from people slowly connecting dots they were never supposed to see in the first place. The biggest thing that stood out to me is how many storylines are circling around deception, fake appearances, and secrets that are getting harder to contain. The arrival of Jonathan Bennett as Joe Fitzpatrick already feels suspicious in the best soap opera way. On the surface, Joe is just another cop entering the PCPD world, but I was immediately wondering why the show made such a point of saying he's not what you see is what you get. In Port Charles, that usually means someone is either working an angle, protecting a dangerous secret, or secretly tied to a villain before viewers even realize it. To me, the most interesting possibility is that Joe could somehow be connected to Jen Sidwell behind the scenes. A hidden informant inside the police department would instantly raise the stakes for multiple storylines. But I also think the show could be setting up something more personal or unexpected. Sometimes General Hospital introduces a mystery cop who eventually turns out to have ties to an old family, a revenge agenda, or a buried crime from years ago. Either way, Joe already sounds like someone viewers shouldn't trust too quickly. Then there's the Windermere situation with Charlotte Cassadine and Danny Morgan. Honestly, anytime teenagers try sneaking into Windermere, disaster usually follows. I kept thinking this storyline has all the ingredients for chaos: getting caught, discovering something they weren't meant to find, or accidentally putting themselves in danger. Windermere never feels like just a spooky mansion in this show. It's almost treated like a vault of secrets waiting to explode. Meanwhile, Rocco Falconeri being anxious while Britt Westbourne steps in to protect him adds another emotional layer to the week. I think the show is trying to balance all the mystery and suspense with some emotional family moments, especially because several younger characters seem caught in situations way bigger than they realize. The storyline I'm most curious about, though, is the growing suspicion surrounding Drew Kane and Jack Brennan having similar stroke-like episodes. Once Elizabeth Baldwin shares information with Dante Falconeri, it feels like the investigation finally starts moving from coincidence into conspiracy territory. I was also thinking about how dangerous this becomes for Willow Kane if the truth starts surfacing. The possibility that she's unknowingly or intentionally involved in administering something that mimics a stroke is massive. And since Carly Spencer already knows Nina Reeves injected Brennan with Drew's medication, Carly feels very close to putting the entire puzzle together. What makes this especially messy is that Willow seems emotionally overwhelmed enough to lean on Harrison Chase while still keeping secrets from him. That almost never ends well in soap operas. At the same time, the possibility of her getting closer to Kane, while Michael Corinthos has a PI gathering evidence, feels like the writers are building toward a major betrayal reveal. I also think the timing of the baby shower preparations involving Trina Robinson and Portia Robinson is probably intentional. General Hospital loves using celebrations as the setting for public meltdowns and shocking reveals. So the moment spoilers mention a party setting the stage for explosive drama, I immediately expect interruptions, accusations, or truths coming out at the worst possible moment. The storyline that may be heading toward the biggest emotional collapse, though, could belong to Molly Lansing Davis. Right now, everything around her almost sounds too perfect. Successful book tour, happiness with Cody Bell, optimism about the future. In soaps, that usually means a storm is coming. Once Molly inevitably learns that Alexis Davis, Ava Jerome, and Christina Corinthos Davis were involved in holding Rick Lansing captive, I think the fallout could hit multiple families at once. And Cody lying about where he found Rick already feels like one of those decisions characters make thinking they're protecting someone, only for it to completely backfire later. To me, the entire week sounds like a slow burn setup for several major explosions at once. Hidden identities, medical sabotage, family betrayals, and secrets that are becoming impossible to contain. General Hospital usually works best when multiple storylines collide together, and this week feels designed exactly that way. I think this upcoming baby shower on General Hospital already feels doomed before it even begins. On this show, celebrations almost never stay peaceful for long, and the writers usually treat events like weddings, parties, and showers as the perfect setup for emotional explosions. To me, Portia's big day has all the warning signs of turning into complete chaos. What makes the situation even more interesting is that Trina Robinson is trying so hard to help make everything perfect for Portia Robinson. There's this emotional layer underneath the planning because everyone is pretending they can hold things together for the sake of family, but tensions are quietly building everywhere. The biggest disaster waiting to happen may be the unresolved friction between Jordan Ashford and Portia. I was wondering if the show is setting up one of those scenes where both women arrive determined to keep the peace, only for one unexpected comment to ignite everything again. The entire Isaiah situation has become way too emotional and personal for either side to stay calm for long. And honestly, the shadow hanging over Isaiah Gannon could destroy the celebration before it even gets started. Curtis Ashford is pushing hard to build a case against him, even though viewers know Isaiah may be taking the fall for something he didn't actually do. I could easily see Portia receiving a devastating phone call in the middle of the shower, informing her that Isaiah has been arrested. Soap operas love dramatic interruptions like that, especially when everyone is gathered in one room. To me, though, the most dangerous wild card might actually be Brooklyn Quartermain. She has been carrying so much guilt lately, and characters in soaps usually crack when emotions start running high in public settings. I think there's a real possibility Brooklyn blurts out something she shouldn't during an argument or emotional speech. Even if she doesn't fully confess, one careless comment about Isaiah's innocence could immediately make everyone suspicious. That kind of accidental reveal is classic GH storytelling. One sentence changes the atmosphere, the room goes silent, and suddenly everybody starts connecting dots they weren't supposed to see yet. Then there's the possibility that all this stress sends Portia straight into labor. I actually think that may be where the show is heading. The timing feels too convenient. She's close enough to her due date that one massive emotional shock could trigger a medical emergency right in the middle of the party. If that happens, the baby shower could instantly transform from celebration to crisis mode within seconds. Screaming guests, panicked family members, and multiple secrets exploding at once. That's the kind of layered soap opera chaos General Hospital tends to deliver when it wants an event episode to feel unforgettable. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd be surprised if this party ends with simple games and gift opening. Everything about this setup feels engineered for confrontation, revelations, and a dramatic cliffhanger. On General Hospital, I think the current situation around Jocelyn Jacks being held captive at Windermere feels like it's building towards something psychologically intense rather than just a simple escape storyline. From my perspective, the longer Jocelyn remains isolated, the more her mind is likely to become the real battleground. I was thinking about how captivity on this show often doesn't just break characters physically. It starts reshaping what they see, what they believe, and even who they talk to in their heads. It makes sense, narratively, that loneliness and fear could start distorting her reality. I think there's also a strong parallel being drawn to what happened with Anna Devane, where isolation led to vivid hallucinations and mental projections of figures like Liesl Obrecht, Peter August, and Caesar Faison. To me, that pattern feels like a storytelling blueprint the writers could easily revisit here. If that same psychological spiral takes hold, I was wondering whether Jocelyn might start seeing ghosts or constructed visions of people tied to her emotional history. Someone like Dex Heller could appear as a grounding presence, while darker influences like Cyrus Renaud might manifest as fear-driven hallucinations. But the most emotionally charged possibility, in my view, would be a return vision of Morgan Corinthos. I think the show has always used Morgan in a way that symbolizes unresolved grief and emotional motivation, especially for characters like Sonny Corinthos. It wouldn't be surprising if that same narrative device shifted toward Jocelyn this time. To me, it feels believable that Morgan's presence, real or imagined, could function as a psychological anchor, pushing her to fight back and survive, especially given how deeply she loved him. I was thinking it would also tie into the emotional strain carried by Carly Spencer, who has already endured too much loss and wouldn't easily survive another tragedy like this. At the same time, I don't think this is just about hallucinations or emotional echoes. Even if Jocelyn is slipping into psychological fragmentation, the narrative still seems to be setting her up as someone who adapts under pressure. I think she may still have hidden strategies or instincts that could challenge her captor, even if things around her feel increasingly unstable. Overall, I see this storyline less as a straightforward captivity plot and more as a psychological pressure chamber, where fear, memory, and imagination all start blending together inside Jocelyn's mind, shaping how she survives and how she ultimately finds a way out. I think this episode really leans into something messy and emotional at every corner, almost like everyone is trying to hold their lives together while the ground keeps shifting under them. To me, the Portia and Trina scenes feel like a rare pocket of warmth in Port Charles. I didn't realize how grounded their relationship has become until Trina walks into the cabin with baked goods and, almost casually, turns it into a full-on baby shower plan. It's simple, but it says a lot. Like Trina is trying to build stability around her mother's new chapter. Portia, meanwhile, is calm on the surface, saying she's ready for the baby and ready for the change. But there's still that undercurrent of tension when the conversation turns to secrets and old conflicts. I was wondering if Portia's reaction about Jordan is less about the invitation itself and more about unresolved history. She tries to frame it as burying the animosity, but I don't think she fully believes it's that easy. Trina, on the other hand, seems determined to believe in fresh starts, almost like she's actively choosing optimism over memory. Then we shift into Curtis and Jordan, and the tone changes immediately. I think Curtis is trying to convince himself that things are under control, but every word he says about Isaiah sounds like someone already bracing for disappointment. He claims he doesn't want to rock the boat with Portia, but I get the sense he's also watching everything very carefully, waiting for one detail to tip the balance. Jordan's moment with Molly stood out to me in a quieter way. I didn't realize how much guilt and self-reflection Jordan is carrying until she talks about the accident and how tied she still feels to her appearance and identity. Molly coming in with white orchids almost feels symbolic, like she's trying to bring peace into a space that's still processing grief and distance. Their agreement to reconnect feels tentative, like both of them are testing whether life can actually return to normal after loss. Then the investigation thread tightens. Isaiah's interrogation with the ADA feels less like questioning and more like pressure slowly building around him. I think his refusal to cooperate, demanding warrants, refusing to engage, reads as both legal caution and emotional defensiveness. It's not proof of guilt, but it's definitely the kind of behavior that makes people like Curtis start connecting dots that might not actually line up. Curtis, in contrast, feels convinced that something is being hidden, even if he doesn't yet have the evidence to say what. And then there's the younger generation storyline, which honestly feels like it's spiraling fast. Rocco's breakdown hits hard because it's not just teenage drama. It feels like a kid carrying knowledge and fear that he doesn't know how to process. I think what makes it worse is how quickly things escalate with Danny and Charlotte pushing toward action instead of caution. The idea of going to Spoon Island by boat feels reckless in a way that could easily turn dangerous, and Rocco's reaction, panic, anger, then outright fear, feels like the only grounded response in that moment. I was wondering if Danny shoving him is meant to show how far urgency has overridden judgment. Rocco calling it out saying they could get themselves killed, feels like the one moment of clarity in an otherwise impulsive plan. But once he's out of the picture, Charlotte immediately aligning with Danny suggests this isn't slowing down, it's escalating. And then the final layer, with Lulu and Britt, brings everything back to emotional consequences. I think Lulu isn't just angry about what happened on the pier. She's reacting to the idea that her son was pulled into something irreversible. Britt, meanwhile, is stuck in a defensive position where protecting Rocco becomes her only focus, even if she's conflicted about the situation herself. What stood out most to me is how both women are actually scared, but it comes out as confrontation. Lulu frames it as blame and control, while Britt frames it as protection and loyalty. Neither of them really has a solution, and that's why the conversation collapses into frustration. When Britt calls Rocco a ticking time bomb, it doesn't feel like exaggeration. It feels like someone admitting she no longer knows how to fix what's already in motion. To me, this episode is less about one single mystery and more about pressure building across every generation. Parents trying to stabilize their lives, investigators trying to force clarity, and kids reacting to danger with impulsive urgency. And I think the most unsettling part is that no one feels fully in control of the consequences anymore. I think what stands out in this stretch is how quickly everything starts to feel like it's slipping out of control for everyone involved. Almost like each character is holding a different piece of a story that no longer fits together cleanly. To me, Britt's attitude feels especially striking. I was wondering if she genuinely believes she's being helpful, or if she's just rationalizing the chaos around her in a way that protects her own choices. She frames Lulu as selfish, pointing out the missed months, the pregnancy, and the early time in Rocco's life. And I can't help but notice how that becomes a moral judgment rather than just an observation. It feels like Britt is drawing a line in the sand and deciding who gets to be the responsible voice in Rocco's life, especially now that Dante knows more of the truth. I think she convinces herself that Dante will be the stabilizing force, while Lulu is positioned as the problem. But I'm not sure reality is that clean. Lulu, on the other hand, feels overwhelmed to the point of breaking. I didn't realize how much pressure she's carrying until she reacts so sharply, pushing Britt out and immediately shifting into fear-driven blame. When she says Britt will be responsible if anything happens to her son, it feels less like a calculated accusation and more like pure panic trying to find somewhere to land. I think that moment reveals how fragile everything has become for her, especially with trust eroding around her. Then there's Gannon's situation, which adds another layer of tension that feels almost like it's waiting to explode. I was wondering how long he thought he could really keep something like that hidden. Scraping the car, the ADA suspicion, the idea that even his alibi might not be enough if someone starts connecting details. It feels like he's actively choosing delay over truth, even while knowing that delay usually makes everything worse. And Lulu's response, telling him to come clean but also asking for a warning, feels like someone trying to maintain control in a situation that's already slipping past her. Meanwhile, Dante's confrontation with Nathan, Cassius, feels like a turning point in trust. I think what unsettles me most is how transactional the logic becomes. Protecting Rocco, making split-second decisions, justifying secrecy as necessity. Dante's reaction reads like someone realizing he's been left out of decisions that define his own child's life. When he says it feels like he doesn't know Nathan anymore, I don't think it's just anger. It feels like disorientation. Like the foundation of who he trusted is suddenly unstable. Nathan, or Cassius, seems convinced he acted in protection, even expecting gratitude. And I was wondering if he truly believes that, or if it's more about controlling the narrative after the fact. His push to move Rocco out of Port Charles adds another layer, like he's already trying to reshape the consequences rather than sit with them. And Dante, shutting the conversation down without resolution, feels important, like a boundary being drawn, even if nothing is fully resolved. Then there's Rocco, and honestly, this is where everything feels the most emotionally exposed. When he shows up at Brit's in tears, talking about fights, guilt, and everything spinning out, I think we're seeing the weight of events no one is letting him process properly. His fear about Danny, Charlotte, and Jason's situation feels like internalized blame piling up faster than he can understand it. I was wondering if he even has space to distinguish what's his responsibility versus what's being projected onto him. Brit's response here shifts again in tone. Despite everything earlier, she becomes the only consistent emotional anchor in that moment. She recognizes his pressure, calls him brave, and even apologizes for pushing him away. I think what's interesting is that she doesn't dismiss him or correct him immediately. She stabilizes him first. But even that comes with caution, reminding him he has to be smart about coming to her. It's support, but still bounded, still careful. Overall, I think what this arc captures is how secrecy and protection keep colliding until nobody is fully honest with anyone, and the people most affected, like Rocco, end up carrying emotional weight they were never meant to hold. I think what makes this whole situation around Rocco Falconeri so unsettling is how quickly his life seems to be shifting from sheltered adolescence into something far more dangerous and psychologically heavy. Growing up in the orbit of Lulu Spencer and Dante Falconeri, he has always been surrounded by chaos. But I was wondering if this is the first time that chaos has actually started to stick to him personally, instead of just hovering around his parents. To me, the idea that Rocco could be tied to the shooting at the docks changes everything about his arc. I didn't realize how fragile his position was until this moment. One mistake, one panic-driven decision, and suddenly he is not just a teenager in Port Charles, but someone who could be looking at serious legal consequences. And I think what makes it even more intense is Dante Falconeri's role in all of this. As both a father and the PCPD commissioner, he is pulled in two completely different directions, and I was wondering how long he can realistically maintain that balance before one side collapses under pressure. What stands out even more to me is the emotional aftermath, rather than just the crime itself. Rocco isn't just facing fear of arrest. I think he is also living in constant anticipation of retaliation or consequences from forces he barely understands. That kind of psychological pressure, especially on a teenager, doesn't just fade away. It lingers, reshaping how he sees trust, safety, and even family. Then there's the unsettling layer involving Nathan West. I think what complicates everything further is the suggestion that the man Rocco has been bonding with might not even be who he claims to be. The idea that Nathan West could actually be Cassius, an imposter with his own agenda, adds a deeply manipulative dimension to the situation. I was wondering if this connection is less about protection and more about exploitation, especially now that Rocco is emotionally vulnerable. It feels like a dangerous crossroads is forming here. Dante may try to intervene by cutting off access between his son and this questionable influence, but I think it might already be too late if trust has been established. And to me, that raises the bigger question. When a teenager like Rocco starts leaning on the wrong people at the exact moment his world is unraveling, is it even possible to pull him back without breaking something in the process? I think the real tension here isn't just about whether Rocco will face legal consequences, but whether he is about to be emotionally reshaped by everything happening around him. I think there's a lot of moving pieces in this General Hospital storyline that are starting to come together in a really messy way, and I was wondering how long it would take before Willow Kane and Jen Sidwell's arrangement completely spirals out of control. To me, Willow is no longer just reacting. She's actively covering tracks now. The situation with Drew Kane being drugged and essentially kept under control feels like it has crossed into something far more calculated. I didn't realize at first how far she might go, but now it looks like she's willing to shift blame whenever it protects her position. Throwing Nina Reeves under the bus after the chaos surrounding the so-called Jack attack really changes the moral balance of everything that's been happening. From what I understand, Nina was supposed to administer Drew's weekly injection, but never completed it, and that small delay ends up creating a chain reaction. Drew regains enough awareness to almost call for help, but Willow intervenes just in time. I was wondering if that moment marks the point where Willow fully commits to controlling the situation, rather than just maintaining it. Meanwhile, the incident involving Jack Brennan and Valentine Cassadine escalates in a way no one seems fully prepared for. In the struggle over the weapon, things get chaotic, and Nina ends up stabbing Brennan instead of her intended target. It feels like one of those turning points where a single mistake reshapes multiple storylines at once. Now Willow's meeting with Sidwell suggests the problem has only grown more complicated. Brennan is alive, but critically injured in the hospital, and suddenly there's pressure to manage not just the situation, but the witnesses, the evidence, and the fallout. I think what stands out here is how quickly the idea shifts from contain the damage to something much darker. Permanent silence as the only solution. To me, Nina is becoming an increasing liability in their eyes. Her unpredictability, guilt, and history make her easy to frame, but also harder to fully control. Sidwell seems to recognize this and starts shaping a plan that puts Willow at the center of the next move. I was wondering how this plan is supposed to stay hidden when it involves multiple steps. Nina delivering a get-well gesture to Brennan, Willow using that moment of vulnerability to administer a lethal injection, and then planting evidence in a way that redirects suspicion. It feels meticulous, but also dangerously fragile. And that's what makes this arc so tense to me. Everyone involved thinks they're controlling the outcome, but every decision is adding another layer of risk. I think there's something quietly building in the world of General Hospital that feels less like a simple tease and more like a carefully planted thread that could connect two soap universes in ways fans have been speculating about for a long time. Recently, I was looking at a social media post from Sawandi Wilson that caught my attention. He seemed to hint, without fully confirming anything, that his character Isaiah Gannon may have deeper roots tied to Landview history from One Life to Live. The way it was phrased almost felt like a soft challenge to viewers. Who has actually figured out Isaiah's family line? To me, that immediately opens a familiar soap opera question. Are we looking at a true legacy connection or another identity twist waiting to be revealed? I was wondering if Isaiah Gannon is even his real identity at all. In soap storytelling, especially in Port Charles, names are rarely as solid as they seem. He could easily be adopted, or his surname might be a placeholder that hides a much older family tie. That possibility alone expands the entire discussion beyond one family tree and into a wider network of legacy characters. Fans have already been trying to connect Isaiah to the Gannons from Landview. But when I think about it more carefully, the official history doesn't really give us a clean bridge. R.J. Gannon's line, for example, doesn't strongly support a missing child storyline. And Carrie Reynolds' branch of the family doesn't clearly leave room for an unaccounted descendant either. So I find myself questioning whether Gannon is truly a direct inheritance, or just a name that's been reintroduced for narrative symmetry. At the same time, soap history has taught me not to dismiss coincidences too quickly. Especially in recent storytelling, retcons and surprise expansions have become almost routine. We've seen twists like Nathan West suddenly being revealed as having a twin, and unexpected returns or redefinitions involving characters like Cassius Faison. So when something feels slightly disconnected, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It might just not be fully revealed yet. I also keep circling back to Nora Hannon Gannon Buchanan, because her history ties directly into the Gannon name through her marriage to Hank Gannon. Their daughter, Rachel Gannon, even carries that lineage forward into the broader soap universe, including appearances in Beyond the Gates. When I consider that branch of the family, I start to wonder if Isaiah could somehow be connected to Hank, or even RJ, in a way that hasn't been acknowledged yet on screen. But then there's another layer that feels more grounded in recent storyline geography, rather than legacy genealogy. Isaiah's background with Doctors Without Borders and his time in Somalia alongside characters like Lucky Spencer creates a different kind of connection. Instead of bloodline ties, it suggests shared history, shared trauma, and possibly overlapping pasts that haven't yet been fully unpacked. And that makes me think about another possible angle, one that pulls in older Port Charles medical history. There was a time when Tom Hardy Sr. and Simone Ravel worked in similar humanitarian spaces, even relocating to Africa in earlier story arcs. If I think in terms of soap logic rather than strict continuity, it doesn't feel impossible that Isaiah could be linked to that world instead. Maybe not as a direct continuation, but perhaps through a sibling connection or an unseen branch of that family history. I didn't initially take the Gannon connection idea too seriously, but the way it's being teased now makes me think the writers may be intentionally blurring lines between established canon and new narrative invention. Maybe Isaiah isn't meant to fit neatly into one family tree at all. Maybe the point is that multiple legacies, Gannon, Hardy, Spencer-adjacent medical histories, are being layered together to create something more complex. To me, the most interesting possibility isn't just who is Isaiah related to, but rather how many histories are being rewritten around him at once. And in a soap universe where identity is never fixed for long, that question might be exactly what the story wants us to keep asking. When I look at the current tension building inside General Hospital, I can't help but feel like we're watching one of those slow-burn revenge plots where every move is carefully calculated, but still fragile enough to collapse at any moment. From my perspective, I think Michael Corinthos isn't just reacting emotionally anymore. He's strategizing. There's a noticeable shift in the way he's approaching Willow and Chase, almost like he's no longer interested in confrontation, but in construction. Building a situation that will eventually speak for itself. I was wondering, though, how much of this plan depends on control that he may not actually have. The involvement of a private investigator feels like the turning point for me. The idea that someone is quietly documenting interactions between Willow Tate and Harrison Chase adds a layer of surveillance that changes the emotional tone of everything. What looks like ordinary closeness could easily be reframed into something more damaging once it's filtered through the right lens, or the wrong one, depending on perspective. I think what makes this interesting is that the evidence being gathered doesn't even need to show betrayal outright. Even subtle gestures, proximity, or moments of comfort could be shaped into suspicion. And that's where things start to feel ethically unstable to me. Because at a certain point, you're not documenting reality anymore. You're guiding it toward a conclusion. The return of the investigator, played by Judy Kane, suggests that Michael's strategy isn't just impulsive, it's organized, almost rehearsed. And I was wondering if that level of orchestration might actually become his weakness. The more structured the setup, the more points there are where something can go wrong. A misinterpreted moment, a missing piece of context, or even someone noticing they're being watched. To me, the most compelling question isn't whether Willow and Chase cross a line, but whether the pressure of being observed pushes them toward choices they wouldn't otherwise make. Sometimes surveillance doesn't just reveal behavior, it reshapes it. So I find myself thinking, is Michael controlling the narrative, or is he slowly becoming trapped inside it?